All right, so I am very excited to be speaking with Andrew Scheffer today, who is known as the Wharton monk, and we will be talking about how he uses mindfulness and his experience of traveling the world with a monk to enable executives and other high performers or high achievers to perform at a level they didn't think was possible. And please be patient in the idea that Andrew looks a little bit like a blue dot and a little blue man today. I can assure that behind that the terrible picture there is a real person, and we just didn't manage to get the video set up properly for that. So I will start in sort of integral style by asking you to introduce yourself with the question of who are you?
Well, thank you for the question. I think I've been trying to figure out who I am for the past maybe greater part of my life, and it's a quest that I'm still haven't come to a final resolution on. But I can assure you, one of the problems and the reasons I haven't come to a final definitive answer is because everything's just changing constantly. So it's hard to nail down any one sense of who I am. I can tell you though that certain themes have, taken over. I feel like I am a passenger in kind of a rocket, and those two themes, I think the strongest themes, certainly up until this point, have been kind of an interest in business and an entrepreneurial spirit, and then also this passion and interest in training my mind, developing my mind, problem solving. That means reducing difficulties in my own life. And then the most recent rocket which has launched has been fatherhood, with a 3.5-year-old and two twins that are 6 weeks old. So I can't ignore that is a big rocket that is launching now.
Well, I think if you can master parenthood and business together, then you can just choose who you are whenever you want from then on. I think um, you can pick your own identity as you wish throughout all of space and time. So you 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 call yourself the Wharton monk, and that sort of is that based on your experience of traveling with a Buddhist monk for a number of years? Tell me how that came about, and what's the biggest thing you learned from all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think uh, so. The name comes when I was at, people started to identify me as the monk. I was, I think the only person at Wharton who had been a monk. So I trained as a monk. I've been a monk in the tradition. I trained in 9 times. So you don't stay a monk unless you keep wearing robes and living that lifestyle. But you can do it. It's considered to be a very beneficial thing to do. So just like people run marathons, and you train for marathons, and so you can become a monk, and then you try and observe the rules of a monk, and do hopefully mindfulness meditation, which is kind of the which ideally should be the epicenter of a life as a monk. And so that's where I got the monk thing, because it was a real thing. And then when I was at Wharton, there's actually in Burma, they tend to call the teachers by, it could be, for example, if you're in New York, you would be called the New York teacher, or the one of the most famous, his nickname was the Big Drum, because in the village that he came from, there had been this very big drum. So just some colloquial reference. So that's how the Wharton monk came about, and people seem to resonate with people, and it clearly reflected my, me.
So it's really interesting. I find it really interesting in terms of the naming of this particular tradition. its like names are then somewhat like location based in a way. Is that true?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it was just, I think going back, it was an easy way to find people and to reference, everyone forgets people's names, but so you make these bigger, easier frame of reference. And so it was quite, yeah, that's where it came from.
And so you said you trained as a monk 9 times.
Yes.
Is there a particular length of time of that training then?
No, it can be 1 week, it can be 6 months, 9 months, it could be a year, it can be a lifetime. I mean,
Okay.
it's up to what you have the capacity or the time or the inclination to do.
Uh-huh. So what's the longest and the shortest length of time that you've trained?
The shortest was probably about 2 weeks. The longest was probably about 9 months.
Okay. So that's quite significant. And what would you say were the biggest sort of insights and learnings that you took from 9 months of consistent training in that discipline?
I think one, if you're interested in meditation, it's sort of the ultimate support or lifestyle to support the development of your practice. Um, so that's kind of the foremost. The second thing would be just the kind of the sense of community and kindness and connection to a tradition. Those were all very powerful aspects of it.
And so, what are the key things for you in bringing that learning and teaching and like taking that into the world in a sort of useful and effective way?
Well, I think part of it is just that there are periods of time that we can dedicate to do things that are beneficial, and those periods, whether they're a moment or whether they're 3 months, 6 months, or a lifetime, they're all beneficial. And so there's not I think one of the beautiful things about the tradition that I trained in is there wasn't a lot of judgment. And in fact, if there was any quote judgment, it was very positive. Like, this is incredible what you're doing. This is unusual in a very positive way. Um, and it was great. You did it for 1 week, great. You did it for 1 week. You did it for 9 months, terrific. There's a certain point where, I love that lifestyle. For me, it was like conditions. I did 3 weeks in California. While the retreat ended, it wasn't really feasible to continue. There was no support. You didn't have a teacher, so that my teacher was going to go back to Asia. So continuing wasn't realistic. But my interest, and at the end of these experiences, 90% of the time, I was like, oh man, what a disappointment to have to give this up and go back to be my parents' son and live with their expectations and trying to figure out a life and a livelihood in America. So, but within the community of people, it's just incredible people with incredibly. When I was in my 20s and I was trying to figure out what my livelihood was going to be, it was particularly challenging because on the one hand, I knew very successful people who were miserable. So they had, beautiful cars and beautiful homes, and they were just nasty people. Um, and then I saw these other people who had nothing. They were stick thin and wore 8-year-old belts with, that didn't look particularly good. And I thought, God, I don't want to look like that. But their minds, there was something buoyant and attractive about that. And as I was like, and it came to me at a certain point, I was actually standing in somebody's Fifth Avenue apartment, and I had just returned from like a 3-month retreat. And I just felt this sense. I remember I was standing in between two rooms, like the living room and the foyer, and I had literally a hand in one and a hand in the other. And I was like, this is me. I've got a hand in this one world of total externally renunciation, and people striving to really reach the highest potential that they can bring their mind to. And on the other hand, I'm in a very, worldly, material culture, and I felt my role was to navigate both of these and to help, help help people in the modern business, Western civilization world understand the value of these teachings, and to bring these teachings into that environment. So both were interlinked through me, and I felt that physically on that time, and that seems to be how my life is kind of playing out.
I mean, for me, that's really powerful because in a similar way, I not so much in a business context, but I've done a lot of different explorations in spirituality, martial arts, been to ceremonies all over the world, and then there's a lot of opportunity for people to kind of retreat from the world. But what fascinates me in terms of like evolution, in terms of humanity's growth on the planet, is like how do we integrate these two worlds? Because it doesn't look to me like that sort of separation between the sort of, if the height of our potential means having to be locked away from the world, and then if we're busy in the world making things happen, we can't access our potential. There seems to be something missing there.
Absolutely.
And so I know you spoke about this is going to be quite challenging, but and I've been having this conversation. I have this conversation a lot. I was having it this morning with a client of mine around how easy it is in the modern world to call oneself an expert. And I know when we spoke before, we touched on this issue that with coaching, mindfulness, embodiment, people often get a taste of people doing it not very well, and then they end up with this sort of belief and like, oh, I tried that, it didn't work. So how do you approach like mindfulness from your point of view, and then also how do you go about educating people into kind of the sort of the essence and the the most useful, pragmatic, and sort of sustainable tools that help with kind of long-term development?
Yeah, well, I don't think I've figured out the secret solution yet to helping people differentiate. And I guess what I was taught indirectly was that you can't, you can't really speak to it directly. But what you can do is show people what you believe or what I believe. I can show people what I believe is the most valuable approach, and it's up to them to uh, figure out, they'll come to their own understanding. So the best thing I can do is try and encourage them, and by being, at least not turning people off too much, and trying to get them to take interest or to to encourage their interest, and then to give them the right tools to experience the most that they can, whatever they have the capability to experience. I don't do a good job of talking and comparing other practices. I mean, I have my opinions, but it never comes out particularly eloquently, and most people feel like I should just be quiet when talking about I can talk about my own practice and the value of it and the benefit I got, and if that inspires people, then hopefully they seek it out and try it for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're developing. It's absolutely a massive integration, the development process for me, as we are building our own program with Fresh Mind in protonic language, meaning that we are consistently kind of clarifying and developing to frame everything positively, be as respectful, genuine, open as possible, and see that while there may be, shall we say, flaws and things that I'm not keen on in many of the approaches and practices that I see in the world, um, doing our best to take that non-judgmental approach and be like, well, at least it's better than what was before. At least people are doing their best with the level of awareness that they have.
And
so
I
it
think,
is.
yeah, I think, you made a good question earlier too. You were talking about how, having a practice that takes you away from the world is good, but we need something kind of in the heat of the moment. And I think that should be the standard. Like, what we need is a practice that we can use, 1,440 minutes a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And um, if it can help interrupt our habitual reactions and provide some space for uh, impulse control and conscious, higher uh, decisions that are not blindly made, then that is anything that can do that. I think is a great practice if it's really doing that. But if it's pretending that it's stopping or providing that space to shift your um, activity, and it's not really, you're kind of missing. There's a real precision here we're talking about now, and so
Mhm.
you need to develop certain qualities of mind, like concentration, to be able to see at the level of detail you need to see to make the transformation and changes that I believe are most effective.
I absolutely agree, and also what I've like I say, what's coming more and more to me, like what we found when we've gone through the process that we created ourselves. It's really interesting because we found ourselves not only becoming more aware in terms of capacity to concentrate, focus, be in the moment, um, act for the most part in a sort of constant state of flow, bliss, awareness, connection, all these kind of terms one can use to attempt to describe the feeling of that sort of stage and state that seems to be somewhat perpetual, but also then, in order to increase concentration, like for example, I found myself eating a lot less meat, eating a lot
Mhm.
less in general, a lot of the sort of some of the habits that were of watching things on YouTube, I've just started falling away. It's almost like through that sort of process of purification, through becoming more mindful, there's simply no room left to be able to do the same habits that one had before.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly, you know, there is a change in our behavior, um, that results from the mind becoming more concentrated, the mind becoming more mindful, filled with more joy. Um, then interactions we have, whether with people or whether with YouTube, that are trying to manipulate our mind in some way and produce some sort of reaction. It doesn't feel as good as when these things come naturally.
Absolutely. So tell me about how you work with people, and in what context, and what kind of people do you look for? Do you look for people who are kind of, driven and successful, and then sort of struggling with one or two things? Tell me about how you bring your mindfulness into the world, and then what kind of impact that has, and with who?
Yeah, thanks. So I guess there are a few approaches, and one, I'm really reworking my total approach. Um, I do find that, because I mean, a lot of the people I'm working with have heard about me in some context. And so they tend to be, senior people that really want some of the benefits that they've been reading about or hearing about, or they want to experiment with this, and they want to try it from somebody that they, believes knows it pretty well. Um, and so what I basically have done, because I could, one-on-one teach the very basic things, but even in Burma, they use, an audio tape to play the basic instructions. So I have created uh, very simple to understand lessons for about 28 sessions that really lay the foundation for how you can start to develop the practice, how you can start to integrate it into your daily life, and how you can then take it to the next level at work and apply it to some of these kind of, whether it's emotional intelligence principles or leadership. So at the end of this 8-week period, people should have, a very solid, not only theoretical understanding, but because from day one, they're starting to learn and practice on their own and develop that capability. So I think what's unique is they get both the theory, but simultaneously they're getting instructions on how to practice. And then they're, again, because this is new and unusual, and people, one of their greatest fears is sitting alone with their eyes closed. So just to start to get people past these and just make, the practice, my teacher, what I always loved is it seems so natural and obvious. And so I try and this isn't far out stuff. Like, you're closing your eyes, you're noticing what's going on in your mind and in your body, and you just use a very simple technique to help you be able to do that. And most successful people, it becomes clear, am I able to do this simple task, or am I distracted? Is something grabbing my attention? And the instructions, then, part of the beauty is, if it's something's grabbing your your attention, that's not a problem. That then becomes the thing to look at. And so this, it opens people's eyes, even though they're sitting with their eyes closed, to see things that are right in front of them that they never paid attention to before, and that are influencing everything they do. So it becomes an incredible, it moves from a sense of, I have to do this, to a sense of, this is remarkable. How could I have been living without this knowledge that's literally, within arm's reach?
That sounds great. I love your phrase there about opening people's eyes with their eyes closed. I think that's absolutely brilliant. Um, so you spoke there about people noticing where their attention goes, and then sort of finding that whole process remarkable. Could you, for people listening, like give some sort of specifics to that, make it kind of real and tangible for people,
Yeah, I mean,
so they
sure.
can taste it? Hmm.
You sit down, and the instructions, the principles of following the breath were twofold. One, as long as we're alive, we have breath flowing through us, literally. So it's always, literally always going to be there. And two, when we're sitting still, the abdomen is the only part of us that is actually moving. I mean, of course, the back gets moved a little, but the diaphragm moves up and down. That's how the mechanism of breathing works. And so the intention behind focusing on our abdominal breath was that it was supposed to be the easiest thing to pay attention to when you're sitting down. But because we're Westerners and we're so caught up in thoughts and, this and that and the other thing, and there are noises around us, and those other uh, objects, those other things, thoughts and sounds, grab our attention. And so, if you've spent your whole morning planning and thinking, just because you close your eyes now, there is the inertia of what you were doing all morning, which was planning and thinking. So even though now you're sitting with your eyes closed, the planning and thinking of your mind, it doesn't stop so quickly. There's no anti-lock braking system for the mind's activity. And so, these habits will continue. And so the breath actually being a very neutral object. I've never met anybody that, is absolutely head over heels in love with their breath. And I've never met anybody that hates their breath. But all these other emotions do come up. You can sit there. Again, your instruction is to pay attention to the breath, and you find yourself getting enraged. Now, of course, it has nothing to do with the breath. It's because of some memory or some frustration. So these are the things that come up. And then we can, again, we now shift our attention from the breath, which is more subtle, to the blatantly obvious, which is the anger or the frustration or whatever it may be. And that can become the object of our attention. And we can learn about it because now we're paying attention to this. Oh, I see. When I have this memory or this feeling, when I feel betrayed, and you start to recognize habits and patterns that are conditioned, in part because we've never looked at them carefully enough to decondition them. And once we start seeing that, oh, when I feel betrayed, I say something mean, then the next time I start feeling betrayal, I can be alert that my tendency is to want to say something mean so the other person knows that I'm hurt. And I have the mindfulness to prevent doing that. I have the self-control to prevent doing that. And I know that every time I do that and say something mean, one, I later feel bad, and two, it just creates more headaches and more problems. So we just become a lot more aware about what's going on, the impact it has, and then we can start making better decisions about how we want to be in the world.
And so do people then, let me think about this for a moment. What I'm curious about now is like, so because you talked about like people feeling betrayal or frustration, how well do you find people initially are able to actually name and notice those feelings? Do people generally have to start with like the sort of the contents of their thought? I know when I've worked with clients previously, I've been like, okay, so just like to feel what's going on in your body there, and I've been like, what body? Like, let's start with your thoughts. So where do you tend to find people in that kind of sense?
Well, that's the beauty of this technique is the instructions are pay attention to whatever is most obvious for you.
Okay.
And so, I don't have to figure out what for each individual person they should be paying attention to because it would be changing every minute anyway. So, it's clear to them. Well, when your attention is focused on something other than the breath, that's what's most predominant for you at that instant. Apply the technique. And then if it subsides, if it reduces, then you can return to the breath. And if not, you can continue to focus on whatever is grabbing your attention away from kind of the simplest and easiest object in a sense.
And then so what difference does this make for people after practicing for the sort of the length of time of your sort of 8-week program? What happens afterwards?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's even well before. Like there was one guy, he had gone through about 2 weeks of the program, and he was from Minnesota and had never done any sort of practices like this before. He had a small advertising agency, and he was driving down the road, and it was 5:30 in the morning, and somebody was tailgating him, and he started to get pretty upset about that. And he started noticing anger, and so he said, "Okay, I'm going to apply this technique now." So he paid attention to his breath. And very quickly, he saw this tight breath, and he shifted his attention to the anger that he was feeling. And very quickly, on noting the anger, it shifted into judgment. And as soon as he had that judgment, the awareness that he was judging this person, because he was thinking to himself, what an idiot. Why is this guy tailgating me? How insensitive. We could, whatever story he was telling himself on the road that was causing him to seethe, then as soon as he noted the judgment, he realized, God, I have no idea. For all I know, it allowed him to shift out of his self-centered perspective and be like, well, heck, this guy may have an emergency. I have no idea what's going on in the guy's car. He pulled over. He let the guy drive by. And the win here was, first of all, his habitual reaction for, the 50 years that he had lived before this would have been to get to work and just been absolutely enraged and teed off that, you know, this guy had, how inconsiderate to be tailgating and the rest. And now he was like, whoa, as soon as I realized it was me that was judging, causing me all this suffering, and I pulled over, it was like a huge transformation of his own character. And it was pretty instantaneously. This wasn't after years of practice. This was, you know, after 10 to 20 minutes of listening to instructions for over the course of 2 weeks.
And that's been that's become a new foundation for him.
Exactly right. And
Yeah.
and the floor, that now is the floor for the further interest, curiosity, and really just opened up the door to him that, like, wow, you know, how else am I torturing myself in my daily life? What other views am I holding on to that are just totally wrong and not benefiting the other or even myself?
I mean, it sounds like that's instigated an entire shift in worldview from being very, you know, self and maybe focused on, you know, family or business or just those individual concerns, to then having like that, you know, kind of leap in thinking to be able to sort of empathize and imagine what other people's situations could be, and you know, that opens up a, you know, a huge you know, a door into compassion, and as you say, can completely create a new foundation of how one sees oneself and relates with the world.
Yes, absolutely.
And so I am going to bring this to a conclusion. So please let people know, how do we get hold of you? How do people contact you with interest, with questions, with anything else to inquire about your course and your work further?
Yeah, terrific. I think my website, mindfulness.business, is probably the best way. And it's still, there's still some construction because we're revamping the program, and I'll have very soon a webinar up, so that people can learn more about kind of what I'm focused on, and the changes that I think are most important to produce, you know, the really the big, and I mentioned it a bit in this call, talking about how you really need a method that allows you to interrupt your kind of unconscious reactions,
Mm-hmm.
and allows you to, if you have a method that can do that and then develop some new clarity and understanding about better choices that you can make, that's it. And then once, just like with the example I gave, once you start making those shifts, those then serve as the foundation for further growth and understanding and transformation. And it feels good. You know, I think that's the one thing I'd want to end with. Um, the understanding that people come to, it's not like that's the way things are. This bigger perspective, this interconnected perspective that we're not self-centered and miserable, that's like the reality of the world. And we spend so much time separating ourselves, building up our identity, and that's the illusion. So, you know, people always talk about spiritual experiences like they're some big deal. And it's no, the big deal is that we're able to obscure that and prevent ourselves from seeing that, you know, 99.9% of the time. And so by keeping ourselves busy with some of these practices, we allow for the prevention of the kind of idea of self manifesting further, and for the direct observation. It's like seeing the stars on a starry night. You know, you allow direct people to view the way things really are.
Absolutely, I think it's incredible sometimes how almost excruciatingly simple it really is, which is possibly why we keep missing it all the time. I know I tend to get to the end of every day and I think, well, I haven't done anything. It feels like I haven't done anything because I'm sitting here living in this moment of like perfect connection with everything. And then I'm like, I haven't done anything. I better hold on. what have I achieved today? And then there's this sort of list of a whole bunch of things in terms of like progress, connections, great experiences, amazing number of things, and it's so hard to miss, particularly when you're so engaged in with life, and that always, it sort of staggers me every single day. So what would you like to finish with, Andrew? Tell me this: if you were to die today, what message would you love to give out to the world so that could resonate through and be captured on this video for years to come?
I, thank you for asking that question. I haven't figured out how to say it in a very attractive way, but I think ultimately, like, let me bear witness that there is something extraordinary that we can experience, that we can not only experience, but we can develop in ourselves. And as far as I'm concerned, it's the absolute most important thing we can do. And so I encourage people to, I started formally when I was 22. And the interesting thing is I've never met somebody who comes to these practices and says, "Oh, I'm glad I waited." If you could have had a little more perspective, a little more understanding for every decision you made in your life, you would say that you want that. And so these practices, that's the way to get that. And there really is something extraordinary here. And I've been thinking about this with my children. What happens if something happens to me? I just wish that they can taste and experience the reality that you can't see with your eyes, but you can know it with your mind.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Andrew. And we'll get in touch again in a few months from now, and once you've got your new website launched, and see how everything's going with that now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. Okay.
All right.